before I shot Archive, I woke up and I had a dream I was shooting the film, and I was talking to my girlfriend. I was like, woke up and I was like, oh, and you know when you're in bed and you're just talking about, you're still in bed, like you've not even got out of bed, and I just had a really, really awful dream. I dreamt I was shooting Archive, and she said, like, isn't that an awesome dream? Like, this is the thing you want to do. Surely that should be like the best dream ever. And I said to her, but it's not at all, because in my dream, everything's weird and I don't know what's going on and it's all confusing and wrong. And there's all this weird stuff. And I'm looking around and I don't understand any of it. And it's a nightmare, because you can't have that when you're shooting a film. Like, you have to know what's going on. You have to have your plan. You have to have your troops. You have to be all set, and, the whole thing, the shooting days are scheduled like, weeks in advance. So you shouldn't be out of your depth, really. I mean, I'm sure there are situations where people can get out of the depth, but I mean, that's my biggest fear, is feeling out of my depth.
Hello and welcome to the Art Department podcast. We're at episode 29 and we have another interview lined up. So it's Emmanuel Shiu in San Francisco, myself in Singapore, and we have a very special guest. We have Gavin Rothery here with us in our studio, so to speak. And he is a very interesting artist that has kind of, I think, started out as a concept artist in the industry, or as as an artist more or less, and then has more recently actually gotten into directing himself. And he has just his first full feature film actually just came out in the US and UK this year. Actually last year it's already, because we're already in January. So and we have plenty of questions for him. So without further ado, here's Gavin Rothery. Can you maybe give us a short intro over maybe just a few highlights of your career so far, where you got your start and where you are at right now?
Yeah, hello. Right, let's see how to encapsulate my life and career in 5 minutes. It's a bit tricky because I've had one of those careers that's kind of bounced around a little bit. Like, I graduated from university back in 1996, and my degree was in graphic design, specializing in illustration. And all I wanted to do was comics. I was just comics. I grew up reading 2000 AD, just copying Simon Bisley whilst I was at school. That was, I'm sure, like most of us, that's just what was going on back then. And yeah, 2000 AD was everything as a kid. And then what happened when I graduated from uni, I was all set to be a comic artist. That's all I wanted to do the whole way through school, university. That was it. And yeah, the two things happened at once when I was graduating. From my time at university, I used to go to the UK Comic Art Convention in Bristol, which was once a year. And this is like in the mid-90s, when comic conventions were like tiny. And it was still loads of fun though, but it was very kind of industry. Everybody was there in the industry, all the artists and editors and things were there. So what you would do, being university at the time and having a bunch of friends that also wanted to be comic artists, we'd all take our portfolios down and we'd go and we'd try and like meet our favorite artists and talk to them and try and get the secrets to being an awesome comic artist, and hopefully get to hawk our portfolios around a little bit, show them our art, and maybe get some pointers, maybe get super lucky and like meet an editor or a writer and maybe like get a job. That's the dream. So through bouncing backwards and forwards at the UK Comic Convention, I got really lucky and ended up coming into the orbit of Alan Grant, who is a Scotsman, a writer, one of the original creators of 2000 AD. And he goes way back. And at the time, he was doing stuff with, he was writing Batman and he was doing all kinds of stuff. And he had three artists that he had under. I became an artist under his wing, basically. He had three artists that he was like working on breaking on his kind of next cycle of comics coming out. And yeah, he wanted me to do Batman with him, which was like, I'm coming out of college and it's like, I got a Batman book with Alan Grant. Like, my career was like just vertical, I was like, this is amazing. And what happened was, I don't know who was publishing Batman back in like the mid-90s. Who was it? I can't remember who it was, but whatever it was, they rotated the editors, and the new editors came in, and they just basically all the projects that were like on the desks of the outgoing editors, they just like swept it all off into the bin. And they were like, right, I'm a new editor, I'm coming in here, everything's going to be my new projects. And Alan had 3 projects with these 3 new artists, and everything just got swept off into the bin and cancelled. And he'd been, Alan's a very successful guy for a reason. Like, he's very careful how he does things, and you spend a lot of time finding artists that you want to work with. So I was really humbled just to be, in that kind of space to start off with. So for him, he wasted loads of his time and energy. And I remember he called me up and told me what had happened, and I was like, and basically my whole world just collapsed. I'm just about to graduate from uni. I just got this amazing opportunity, and then it had just gone straight in the bin. And I mean, it was a good kind of primer for the way a lot of other things in my career were going to go.
No, for everyone, yeah.
I mean, I'm sure we've all got these stories, right? And I had that right as I was graduate. I was still at uni when this was happening. I was in my final year. So that was lots of fun. And that was in the mid-90s. So like I say, I graduated in 96. And what happened around then was the comics industry really kind of bottomed out in the mid to late 90s. And what happened was Sony, a few things happened in market forces and things, but Sony launched PlayStation 1 and they marketed it really, really heavily. And if you remember back then, they basically made games very cool. They were like, there were a couple of things going on around the time. Consoles had just entered the true 32-bit generation and moved into 3D. PlayStation marketed it so well. They made a few really smart moves. They were releasing products like Wipeout. You had a full 3D polygon racer that was running. I don't know what the frame rate was on that, but it was a fast game. They had a really banging soundtrack with like hot bands at the time, like the Prodigy, putting the soundtrack in. And what happened was computer games went from like kids playing this Mario on the Super Nintendo into like that generational leap went from, kids at school playing Mario in the bedroom to PlayStation sponsoring like really cool nightclubs with awesome DJs and making it really kind of cool. And so they had like, I remember PlayStations appearing in nightclubs, and you'd wander around and you'd be having a night out and you'd get on a PlayStation and play a bit of Wipeout. It was brilliant fun. And it was all, the marketing just made it cool and kind of grown up. Excuse me. And games really matured around that area, that part of the calendar, like that period. Because, I mean, the consoles were expensive too, right? You went from a Super Nintendo, which was maybe 180 quid with a bundle, to a PlayStation at launch was what, 550 pounds in the UK? Like, really hot. It's like buying a PC. It's like really expensive hardware, plus like 50 quid games. So the prices leaped as well, but everything else leaped, and it worked. I mean, obviously we know now how successful the PlayStation 1 was. But in the industry around that time, what was happening was all these studios were popping up all over the place with people that had kind of cut the teeth on the 8 and 16-bit hardware, like the NES and the SNES, the Genesis or the Mega Drive. And all of a sudden, they're setting up studios for like next gen stuff. Software was starting to, 3D software was really starting to, like, I remember it was always hooky pirate copies originally of 3D Studio, the original 3D Studio, and it came on like a ton of floppy disks. I remember I actually got a hold of a hooky copy of that when I was at uni. I didn't know what to do with it. It felt important, so I just it was just making copies of the discs, and I had this stack of discs. I didn't have a PC. This felt important to have this software. So I remember having that. And I didn't even have a computer. I didn't know how to use computers at that time. When back in the mid-90s, like Photoshop was still one of those trades where if you were good at it, you could make hundreds of thousands operating Photoshop. There was that sweet spot before the skills got them up. Well, it wasn't the sweet spot. That was actually the precursor to the sweet spot. The sweet spot is when the skills get democratized and everybody can get hold of the tools. But back then, if you were working in the industry, the sweet spot was getting paid 250k to do commercial artwork for print using Photoshop, right? When nobody knew how to use it. And I don't know how much a license cost back then, but it was a very niche skill that was very, very, very expensive for the industry to hire into. But if you got one of those jobs, you were cashing it in there was a period of about 3 years, and if you could use Photoshop and get one of those jobs, you were just making bank. But every kind of cycle of technology, not you don't see it so much these days, but back then, whenever there was a new piece of software came out that had a new skill attached to it, like 3D, like being a 3D modeler. So if you were fortunate enough to work at a company like Psygnosis back in the mid 90s, and you were in there and you were working on the silicon graphics machine, and if you knew how to operate that machine and you were using like Alias Wavefront back then, you could really make bank, like operating as a 3D player back then. So I mean, now obviously it's kind of funny to think that it was ever like that, but it did used to be like that. These machines, what was an Octane back then, like 46 grand? No, in India was
Super expensive.
an Octane was like, Octanes were like over 200k. I mean, it's cool now because you can see these things coming up on eBay, and I love watching YouTube videos of the collector communities. I can watch you watch a video of someone taking a package from the delivery guy, and they open it up and it's like an indie, and they're like, oh, and they crack it open and there's beautiful turquoise split kit. Well, it's kind of ugly really, but it's just something cool about it that I'm always going to feel warm inside with an indie or an Octane, any of these old boxes. Like they were like, it was like the Ark of the Covenant back in the day. It was just like light shining out of it. It was just so exotic and mysterious. So yeah, I'm kind of basically going around the houses now to talk about how I fell into the games industry, because it was a very exciting time back then. And all of a sudden, all these little studios are popping up and they're all over the place. And what I understand now is that back then, a development deal would be £1 million, £2 million, as it was in the UK. And that would get you a title for PlayStation 1. And so companies like Eidos were taking a lot of kind of chances, a lot of chance bets on these small studios. And this was back in the day when I remember it was the second games company I worked at, but the first company I worked at was in Dewsbury in Yorkshire, where I was born in Yorkshire and went to Leeds Uni. So everything I was doing was Yorkshire, which was very parochial before the internet. And I knew I had to get down to London because all these 2000 ADs published in London, got to get down to London. Games companies are down in London, got to get down to London. So I had this whole thing about I'm going to get down to London and I'm going to get involved in all this stuff. I'm going to figure it out. So I had a portfolio of all my comic art, which was at a decent level, and I just had tons of enthusiasm. And my whole attitude was, I was buying Edge magazine because it was the most professional, slickest looking magazine on the newsstands. And more importantly, back in the day, late 90s, Edge had all the jobs in the back. There'd always be a bunch of pages at the back of Edge magazine, and it's got all your jobs. And so I was like, well, this is it. This is what I need. I got my portfolio. I'm going to photocopy a bunch of, get like a stack of samples of photocopied art, all in the envelope. Off it goes. And my first job was at a place in Dewsbury, but I was only there for 2 months before the place closed because it was going bankrupt. Jesus. But I worked for 2 months, spent as little money as possible over that period, and I was coloring illustration cells in Deepmind. And that is the first time I'd ever done any kind of art on a computer. It was just coloring animation cells. I was there for 2 months. Company went down. I took all that money and bought myself a P166 with two 1.7 gigabyte hard drives, which I thought was so big I was never going to fill those up. I remember thinking that really clearly. 4 megabyte onboard graphics. Oh, that thing was a beast.
Yeah, not gigabyte, megabyte. Yeah.
15-inch monitor. I just put all my money into it, and I went bigger than the standard 14. I went for a 15-inch CRT. Ooh. Just to max out what I could get. I got that hooky copy of 3D Studio, got that on there, and just figured it out. Just played with it, poked around, and I mean, those old programs are so opaque. I mean, really, the original 3D Studio was like 4 different programs. You got your lofter and your shaper, and that whole thing was just so difficult to get into, but so much fun. Like, I would just literally just stay up all night working on that thing. At the time, I had a girlfriend that lived in Kent, and I just finished uni, and I would travel from Yorkshire to Kent every weekend. One or other of us would come up or down, and I was so into working on the computer that the weekend when I would go down to see her, I would bring my computer with me. I'd go down to her house in Kent, a parent's house, set up my computer in a bedroom, and just kind of stay in there.
Yeah, it's not like a laptop, right? You bring like a big monitor with you.
Big 15-inch CRT, the tower, mouse, keyboard,
Amazing.
everything in
She's
the
like, who's
car.
this guy?
Drive my little Rattly Ford Fiesta, drive down to Ken, set up again in her bedroom, and just kind of hang out with her whilst I was still doing the same thing. So bad, such a bad boyfriend. But yeah, this got me a job at a games company in London. Who were all these companies are gone now.
Mm.
They were called Pure Entertainment, and they were like this was like for me it was like the kid from the sticks arriving in the city. Like they had offices on Great Portland Street. We had Virgin Radio above us with like Chris Evans and all his celebrity guests coming in and out the same doors.
Ooh,
It was super cool. I
yeah.
was living in a really pokey little flat in East London, but my work office was beautiful. I had like a P200 at work, a P200 Pro, and that was like so much more powerful than my 166. And I just felt like I'd arrived. I was in this game studio, and what I said to them when I had an interview, I came down all the way from Yorkshire to have an interview, and I said, I don't know anything about computers, but I'm gonna learn it. Here's my art, and my mission is to translate this into the computer. I just need, I'll do it. I'll just figure it out. Just give me a shot, and I'm getting in there, and it worked. And I basically got a job in a games company, like a proper games company,
Mm.
without really knowing anything about computing and nothing about 3D at all. And because my kind of timeline for this was I went straight from my first job, bought that first PC, cranked it up with like all the software I could get hold of, started getting into it just as this was all happening. So the time, like everything was like tumbling over itself. I was trying to kind of get things going and elevate my position, and then I'd kind of have a little break and be able to search forward, like trying to learn 3D, get a job. Now I'm working day to day, and I'm learning as I'm working, and I'm not just learning the technicalities of the software. I'm learning the nuance of it, like straight away. On my first day, I'm making 3D models for a game, so I'm having to understand like low poly budgets and like how to texture for PlayStation, all those weird little tricks you had to do with the first version of 3D Studio Max, where you couldn't even have a multi-material. Like you had to trick the software by you could only assign one material and one texture to one object. So to trick it, what you had to do was create an object, assign a material to the bit you wanted, and then delete the other bit. Do the same on another object, and then just merge the two together. And you kind of tricked it into making a multi-material. I mean, this is how primitive it all was back then, but I really got into it, like finding these little hacky ways of making it do things it wasn't supposed to do. Super appealing. Like I was like living for that back in the day, because the way I always kind of saw it, being competitive, being an artist, you're always trying to do the best art, and these kind of things give you an edge over the people that can't do it. So any little hacky little trick I could figure out to make things better or more effective or look cooler or work better was that was my kind of bread and butter, figuring this stuff out. And yeah, so that was me in the games industry, and this is '97, like right back in the early. Well, it feels like ancient times now. It's such a long time ago. To me, it feels like about 4 lifetimes ago. But because my career has kind of moved through different stages since then. But what happened then was, I mean, bearing in mind these studios to get a development deal back then, all you needed. I saw this happen. I saw a £3 million development deal close with a double-sided piece of A4 sales a brochure. It wasn't. He didn't even have staples in it. It was one piece of like medium weight card, nicely printed on both sides, telling you what the game was going to be with a bunch of artwork. That got a game deal for £3 million from IDOS at the time. It was amazing seeing that. But I mean, obviously now to get a game deal, you've got to basically make 2/3 of the game to actually, as an indie studio, you've got to demo it so heavily, which is cool because the demo shakes out the game and you can get a good idea of what the game's going to be. But it's just a different world than it was back then. It was very much like the Wild West back then, and so these studios would pop up once people kind of cottoned on to being able to do this. Having good art was like good physical art, like good drawing, good Photoshop work was a really core skill because people used that to get these deals. So I was in a really sweet spot where I could do all of that stuff, but I was also figuring out all the other stuff. And I'd got all these like little tricks I'd figured out for real time, like runtime stuff, like low poly work, things like making sure that any mesh with any amount of junk data attached to it, like a way of stripping all of that out, so it will always get through the import or export software, which was that was like always a big bugbear because everyone's writing their own tools because it's before the engine's really standardized. I'm really going off on one now about what things were like back then. Kids watching this, it was a different world back in the late 90s. Do not know how good you've got it with mature, stable tools to start a project with. We had to build everything from scratch back then. Every project starts new. It was awful, but that's just what it was. So that's me in the games industry. And back then, what tended to happen was these companies, they didn't really last that long. I mean, a lot of companies back then didn't even finish they'd get one development deal set up. Nobody knew what they were doing. Everyone was trying to figure it out as they went along. A lot of these studios would go down before they even delivered any product.
Oh my god.
So studios come up, studios go down. And within about 3 years of working in London, I'd worked at about 5 or 6 different studios. But it turned out that was awesome because what happened was you work at a studio. This was a part in my life where everyone would just go to the pub after work and we'd be drinking 4 nights a week, 5 nights a week would be in the pub. Sometimes like every night we'd just out of work into the pub. So it was very social, loads of fun. Everybody, you figure out very quickly if you're going to be friends with someone, you'll be fast friends and you'll be good friends. And then what happens is the studio goes down, everybody gets jobs at new studios, and you start hanging out with them and their new friends, and you get a new job and they start hanging out with you and your friends. And within a couple of years of being in London, I knew people in every studio. I had like really good friends in like every studio. You've got your whisper network down, you know what's going on. And so whenever you're working somewhere and it goes down and you need a job, the people at the new company that you end up working at already know you. You know each other from the pub. And so part of me was thinking like, this is crazy. I'm kind of unemployed every 6 months. And part of me was thinking, this is awesome. I've got a new job every 6 months. So it was really fun, really interesting, met tons of people, learned loads. But I ended up working at a place called Elixir Studios, which was in Camden, it was owned and run. I mean, again, Elixir Studios long gone. It was owned and run by a really interesting chap called Demis Hassabis, who now is more well known for setting up Deepmind, which sold to Google, which created AlphaGo.
Oh.
So that whole thing, from what the origins of that are from a game that we all worked on called Republic the Revolution, which was Demis's. Demis is a really interesting guy. He got his start when he was 15. He did theme park when he was 15 with Peter Molyneux. He won some competition and got some work experience as a kid. And he made theme park whilst he was like sort of interning, like as a prize winner, I think it was. He made theme park and that established him. Then he's a smart guy. Then he got a bunch of venture capital, set up Elixir, and I met him those subsequent years later. So I met Demis in like 98? 97, later 97, 98. I met Demis, and Demis hired me to work on this game. There was about 10 or 11 of us at the time. It was a very fledgling studio, and they crewed up. We were making this game that was a political power simulation, and the idea was to make a country that was 1,000 miles by 1,000 miles, so 1,000,000 square miles of former Soviet fictional country. And you start off as Joe Public, and you've got to work your way to power to control the whole country. So it was like a power game. And you can do it through military might by trying to stage a coup. You can do it through taking control of a religion or some kind of like workers' parties and all that kind of stuff. So it was a really interesting game, but we were making this in the late 90s and it was just impossible and the whole thing ended up collapsing. But the ambition was amazing. Demis since went on, created Deepmind, created AlphaGo, sold that to Google for 400 million. Demis is a dude. He was always a dude, and he's still a dude. And the robot overlords that will rule over us, it'll be his fault when that happens. I mean, God knows what that guy's going to do in the future. If you look at his trajectory and what he's achieved and where he's going, I mean, it's not like they've finished. I know that StarCraft, we used to play a lot of StarCraft in the office, and a lot of Go as well, because Demis always had a Go board set up in the office. I remember him teaching me how to play Go, which now is like a kind of a cool story thing. Like Demis Hassabis taught me to teach Go. Back then, it was just like a little fun, because there's lots of gaming going on in the office. There's a really cool ethos in that place, which kind of fed down from him. And so we played a lot of StarCraft, and now they're doing AlphaGo, it's like Alpha StarCraft, which is the complexity of StarCraft, like when you get into that, that game's phenomenal. So yeah, that was cool. But I also met somebody else very interesting at IDOS. Somebody interesting at Elixir, which was my friend Duncan Jones. So he
Oh,
was
okay.
working as a writer, and he was writing on for this game, Republic of the Revolution. It needed all this lore set in Eastern Europe. So Duncan had just graduated film school, and he was brought in as a writer because he always loved games too. He came in as a writer to write all this fictional lore about this European country, and I was working on the art team, and so we just ended up becoming friends. And it was funny because I knew him for ages before I knew who his dad was. He was just like Duncan from work, um,
Oh, okay.
so it was kind of a weird one. But whatever. I mean, I never, to be honest, I personally never grew up listening to his dad's music, so it wasn't that big a thing in the moment. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, we just became friends. We just like the same stuff. We like sci-fi. He'd graduated from film school, but he was at the London International Film School, and they had this weird rule where when you finish film school and you graduate, you don't finish film school until you deliver a graduation film, and you can do that at any point you like. So he'd finished all his lectures, finished going into film school, so he'd finished in that regard, but he hadn't finally graduated until he delivered a final film. So he was like looking for, trying to figure out what he was going to do for his graduation film, and we both love sci-fi. I had spent quite a bit of time now with my day-to-day work being the kind of runtime environment art of the time. So I was making characters with like 200 polygons in and 250. It's like the PlayStation genre, right? What it was back then, the PlayStation era. And so I wanted to get into the more powerful 3D tools. I want to get into the higher end stuff. And I've been asked to do bits and pieces of FMV, and I was doing loads of stuff at home. But I wanted to spread my wings and open up the toolbox and you know do all the fancy stuff.
Hmm.
So meeting Duncan and hanging out with him, he was like, "Well, I want to make sci-fi films." I was like, "I want to do cool sci-fi graphic stuff and use all my designs and make." My whole mission I always wanted was to make things that weren't real look real, like as if they existed. And so when I was at uni, I was all about the airbrush. I spent my first student loan on how to get on an airbrush and just figured out how to use it. And yeah, I got to that point where I could do really nice airbrush illustration and it'd look real. And so I enjoyed creating images of sci-fi stuff that looked real that was never real and never existed. And so computers were perfect for me. Like when I started getting into computers and properly looking at opening up renderers and stuff in the subsequent years, that was just wonderful. But yeah, so that was always my kind of mission. So that was why I wanted to get into the heavier end of stuff. So we just started hanging out. We ended up coming with an idea together for his student film. That became this thing called Whistle, which is actually on the Moon DVD and Blu-ray.
Ah,
Uh,
okay.
and we just moved in together and worked on everything together for like 10
Oh.
years. So we just basically moved into a house together, set up our desks next to each other in the lounge, just spent all our time either playing Half-Life or Counter-Strike or trying to come up with stuff we could make. So that then got quite interesting because Duncan wanted to be a director. I was just doing the art stuff. But excuse me, we talk about all the other creative stuff. So we talk about what would make cool stories. I had like a shelf full of like growing up on sci-fi. I was the guy with the shelf full of all the vintage sci-fi, and I'm like, watch this. This is cool. This is cool. Um, and yeah, we were just two mates sharing interests basically and working on things together. So he got signed with a production company, and they started bringing in like briefs for things. And at the beginning, it was like zero budget promo videos, like literally no money, test commercials, things like that. And so whatever it was, I'd like do all the concept and the VFX work, and we just make things together. So that ended up with me. We're just doing. I never went to film school myself, but that was kind of like my film school because we were doing. Duncan was bringing his film friends from film school to make these little crews, and I was in the middle of all of that. And so I kind of learned how all of that stuff worked. And we just worked together for like 10 years trying to make a film. Excuse me. And eventually we did. Eventually we made Moon.
Yeah.
But Moon came from myself and Duncan living together, just trying to make a sci-fi film. And along the way, we managed to elevate our careers where we went from zero budget test pieces and just knocking around doing stuff to we worked our way up through smaller budgets and bigger budgets, and we ended up doing like 250 grand TV commercials together and stuff like that. So it was going really good. And then we did Moon. So yeah, that was awesome. And along the way, I did a little sideline along the way in 2004 because I set up my own company. All these companies coming and going, getting hired and companies going down and being unemployed, it was kind of starting to bug me a bit. Because when I met Duncan, I was like, right, I just want to do all this film stuff really. So what I did was I set up a company to create free. How's best to explain this? I had a bunch of friends who also wanted to go freelance, and I was quite happy being freelance because I was using half my time doing film stuff with Duncan. So I didn't want to be going into an office every day because we had our setup at home. So I basically set up a company where I would work with. This is back in 2000. I set this up, 99. I would bring my friends in as freelancers. I'd go out, get contract work, form a team for the job. I knew what people were doing and I knew how good they were. And one of the things that frustrated me at the time was people in companies being used as general art assets. And I could see people who had clear specialities and they weren't being used. And it used to drive me crazy. So I created small teams of really good people that were working to their strengths. And it meant that we could bid really cost effectively on a job and work very efficiently. So that was what I was doing to pay my bills. I had this company called Think Tank Studios that we'd set up, and I'd do that, sort of pay my bills, work freelance, hire my friends in, and I had like my regular guys that I'd work with. Excuse me, and yeah, work on stuff with Duncan. And we got some really cool jobs. Like we worked on things like, we did the vehicles for the Xbox SKU of GTA 3 and like Vice City and stuff, which was awesome. We did all kinds of cool stuff. Did the Battalion Wars games for Nintendo, like designed and made the vehicles for those for Battalion Wars 1 and 2. Really cool stuff, like fun projects. There was a lot of other bread and butter stuff along the way, but we had some really good contracts in there. And yeah, in 2004, I had an interesting thing pop up where a friend of mine, no, it's 2003 this happened. A friend of mine saw an ad on the early internet, as it was then, saying, would you like to be a zombie in a film? So I grew up with the Romero films, and I was like, I would definitely like to be a zombie in a film. So he's like, let's do it. Let's reply to this ad and go and have an audition. So I'd never had to do an audition for anything, but went along. And I'd spent a bit of time being put in front of the camera because whenever I was doing stuff with Duncan, he always found it hilarious putting me in front of the camera. So I'd been in a load of stuff, but it was all little tiny things no one's ever going to see. So I went along, had an audition, got it, was told I was going to be a zombie. And then we got call sheets for night shoots out in New Cross in southeast London. And it turned out it was Shaun of the Dead. The project was still Shaun of the Dead. So at the time, I had like short blonde hair, and there was a period in our lives when myself and Simon Pegg were really similar. So I was out there being a zombie, and we didn't know anything about this. Zombie films weren't really being made around then. And I remember being on set and just thinking, oh, cool, it's the Space guys are making a zombie film. That's awesome. Because I was a big fan of Spaced. I was always getting jip from friends about Spaced because I looked like Simon Pegg and was a comic artist, and in Spaced he looks like me and is a comic artist, and I was always getting hassle off my friends about those similarities. And then all of a sudden I'm in Shaun of the Dead, and someone in the production pulled me out of the zombie crowd and asked me to stand in for Simon. So 4 days of night shoots in New Cross turned into me spending a few weeks over the summer standing in for Simon, which was just brilliant because I was right in the middle of Shaun of the Dead, all the pub fighting stuff. I got to play with shotguns and stuff. It was super cool. But that was amazing. So it's funny at the time because I was living with Duncan and we were trying to make our own sci-fi film, and on the daytime I was driving over to Ealing Studios to be in Shaun of the Dead, which was fantastic. And it was cool because when you're making things, you don't know how people are going to receive them. And now Shaun of the Dead is this awesome legendary film, and I was fortunate enough to play a very small part of that, and have all these cool memories of being there when it was made and seeing it work. I mean, people like Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, like when you see these people working, when you want to do that and you're kind of anonymously right next to them watching it happen for like a few weeks, it is so inspiring. Honestly, it's so inspiring. And I'd come home every day telling Duncan what would happen, and yeah, I know he used to get quite jealous about that because that was what he was trying to. You can't help it when you sign out. It's these things kind of niggle your look because it's what you want to do, right? But yeah, it worked out okay in the end because we got Moon Med. But yes, that was another little bit of a diversion. So around 2007, we were pulling our hair out because the career stuff was going okay, but we were no closer to making a film. And around 2006, we put a lot of energy into a sci-fi thing called The Line that we were working on, and it ended up becoming nothing. We were really down after that because we had cool conversations going on. We had I remember we had a whole load of conversation. We worked out this technology we were going to do, and it was going to be full body replacement, where we were going to have real actors in chroma key suits, but all the skin was going to be real. Because I was always frustrated about how the CG characters just didn't look good enough and couldn't hold it for me. So I just thought, what if we use real skin and everything else is CG'd in, because we can do the rest of it. So we shot a test of it and it came out really nicely. And we had a character in a full costume, which was chroma key, but built out to have the same forms. Real hands, real face, real, neck up real, shot on a green screen environment, or blue screen actually it was. And what we did was basically swapped everything out with CG. I spent quite a bit of time building CG environment, CG body, CG costume, and we shot this 70-second scene of a guy on a firing range, walking into a firing range, pulling a weapon, taking a few shots, and then a guy sort of taking the mickey out of him on a PA system, and them having a little bit of banter whilst he was trying to zero his gun. And it looked beautiful, and we were all set to do was that we were going to use this kind of awesome VFX technology we'd figured out, because what we were doing that was different. This is before you could get hold of before tracking software was really a thing. I'd never seen it at that point. What we did was we put a tracking crown on the camera, so the camera had tracking points, and the camera was in the motion capture volume. So we had an actor with points, props with tracking points, markers on, and the camera with marker on too. And we've got all the lens information and stuff. And it was a bit hacky, but we figured out what we could do was essentially track the camera as well. So it enabled us to go handheld with the camera. So this whole thing was shot handheld, and it looked really good. And this was going to be our cool technology that was going to power this film. But we were just really naive, and we thought we'd be able to get $100 million to make a sci-fi film as unknowns, because everybody kind of thinks that when they start out, and we were no different. So we were doing two things at once. We had this really cool technology with a bunch of cool ideas behind it, and we were oblivious enough of how the industry works to ever think that mattered, because we were here on the ladder. So this means nothing, even if it's cool. And at the same time, because we'd got cred from all the freelance stuff I've been doing in the games industry, we were going to we were trying to cross the streams, and it was we're going to set up a studio, we're going to do a game, we're going to do a film, it's going to be awesome. And we had really great conversations going on with Sega at the time to set up a studio and get a game done. But each party, we were talking to some production companies, each party wanted the other thing to go first. And so we thought it was all about to happen for quite a while. Excuse me. And it turned out each party was waiting for the other to commit, and so really nothing was ever going to happen. And when we kind of realized what was going on, the whole thing was just oh my god, this is never going to happen. And so basically me and Duncan had a big sit down, and we were we've got to make a film. We felt like our lives were ending, and it was we've got to do this, we have to do this. So we thought, okay, let's just figure out what we can get hold of, and we'll make a film for that, no matter what. And so we thought, from some people we'd met in the industry and this, that, and the other, we thought we might be able to get £250,000. We might be able to scrape that up if we were lucky. And so we got to figure out how to make a sci-fi film for £250,000. And that then led into lots of late night discussions about, well, it wasn't that long actually, it came together quite quickly. It was all about, okay, well, my take on it was always, don't overthink it. We got one guy stuck somewhere, we're going to do a sci-fi film, let's go old school, we use the old techniques, we use miniatures, build sets. There's a bunch of ingredients we can give it that will set it appropriately. We'll give him a robot buddy, we'll give him a sci-fi job with a buggy he needs to ride around in, all these old films like Silent Running, outline. They've got these kind of shades in them, like these kind of ingredients. So we'll do that stuff. We'll have a sinister corporation as the baddie because it's perfect for vintage sci-fi. And we'll make something using old school techniques because it's all we can afford. You know, Red Dwarf does it. You know, we'll do that. We'll create sets out of bread baskets, you know, plastic bread crates, and paint everything white, put some lights on there. We'll figure it out. Like, we'll figure it out and we'll make it. And so that ended up becoming Moon. And then, you know, before you know it, with Duncan pulled a real blinder. Like, he basically went out to New York and met up with Sam Rockwell and convinced him to be in it. And it was like, holy shit. And that opened up some more money because all of a sudden we've got film star. I mean, Sam Rockwell in 2006, 2007 wasn't regarded the same way he is now by financiers, but still Sam Rockwell. And anyone who knows anything about film, since the first time they saw Sam Rockwell, knows he's cool, right? So we had Sam Rockwell, which was wonderful. So yeah, budget ballooned a bit and that became Moon. So Moon was basically the biggest student film I've ever heard of.
Oh, okay. Wow, yeah.
It still wasn't huge. I mean, we ended up with about just under £2.5 million, I think it cost. But I mean, £2.5 million, like, it's not a lot. It's a lot of money if you're spending it on drugs and hookers, but it's not a lot of money if you're spending it on a film, right? Trying to make a film. So one of the big things that I did on Moon, I mean, you know, I designed, like, coming from a background, myself and Duncan, like, my whole thing was always like, I've got this, so I'm going to make it look awesome. And because it was like concept and VFX, I always kind of used to think of it as like having my arms around it, because I'd be in at the start and in at the end. And that then became, you know, I'm doing the VFX, I've got to supervise it, I've got to be on set when we're shooting, and it just filled in the middle bit. So I was basically just there the whole way through. So that was my typical role when we were working together, was just being with Duncan all the time and just sorting all that stuff out. And it caused quite a bit of friction when we were doing Moon, because I was just working with Duncan like we always did, and I'd just be strolling into people's departments and like telling them what to do. And I didn't realize at the time, because I was just being really naive and just thinking like, we'll just make this thing as good as we can. But afterwards, like, people that I became friends with on the production, they sort of told me after the fact, once we'd become friends and it was all finished, that the first time they met me, they were like, who the hell's this guy, like, coming in here telling me what to do? Like, who is he? Like, he's not a director. What's he doing? And I just like stroll in and like, yeah, we've got to do this, got to do that. Okay, just get that done. I'll be back tomorrow. And everyone's like, what's this guy? Which I didn't realize how awkward. It wasn't awkward for me, because my perspective was like, I was oblivious to this. And I understand now, you know, that, I don't know, I should probably be cringing at the thought of it even, but that's just what was happening. Neither of us knew what we couldn't really get away with, so we were just doing things till somebody stopped us, and nobody ever stopped us.
That's one way to go about it, yeah.
Yeah, but Moon was crazy. I mean, I worked on that film for 22 months. It was hard. At the time, I'd say I'd never worked on anything as hard in my life, but now I can say I worked harder on Archive. But Moon was like, it was hard. I mean, we were shooting at Shepperton. We were living in West London at the time. So, I mean, really, that should have been a breeze. Like, the studio's like 40 minutes drive from the house. Like, I mean, you know, when I was shooting Archive, I was like in Hungary and way out in the middle of nowhere. But, you know, really, it sounds like it should have been a nice, comfortable shoot, but there's just so much work going on. And there was loads of stuff that I was doing, which was just the way that myself and Duncan always worked, which I had to do it because the film wouldn't have got made. So things like, we didn't have a graphic design department, so I was like, well, I'll do that. So design a bunch of logos, get a bunch of decals done for the walls, do a load of motion graphics for the monitors, because all that video stuff and the tech in there was just played off DVDs with DVD players like plumbed in through the back of the set. So I had a big wallet with like about 170 odd, I think it was, video sequences that needed to play. And some of them were random looping things that were just in the background, but some of them were key story elements with video conversations and things. And that stuff was being done so crazy. I mean, when we were shooting Moon, I was always trying to get ahead, but there was always so much to do that stuff was being done the evening before it was needed to be shot. So I'm burning CDs at like 4:30 in the morning, and the car's outside at 6, you know, and that stuff's needed for the day. And it was crazy how we got that stuff done. I mean, there was things happening like, we didn't have any insurance for stunts or a stuntman, and I was the same height and build as Sam, So I ended up doing like the stunts and it
Yeah, I
doesn't
saw
look
that.
like there's
Yeah.
a lot of stunts in Moon. It doesn't look like there's any stunts there, but when you're looking at a shot and it's him getting in and out of the top of the rover, what that actually was because the shooting schedule was so tight. That setup was the same setup we used for the crash, where the whole thing's at like 15 degrees and he comes in through the roof there. All of that stuff was the same setup to save time. So when we were shooting that, I had a spacesuit on, which had snowboard boots on the feet, so I couldn't feel anything through my feet. They were just like big lumps of plastic. The suit was like double layered duvet, so I was like really hot. The helmet had a little fan in it that was supposed to demist it, but it didn't work. But that didn't matter anyway because the yoke on the helmet came out like this, and it didn't have any glass in it, so you couldn't any plastic, so you couldn't see down. So I couldn't see my feet, I couldn't feel my feet. I had gloves on and everything. I had the helmet on, so I couldn't hear anybody shouting at me. And I was up 25 feet on a surface that was mounted at the top of the rover that was built at full scale, that was mounted at 15 degrees, that had all these knobbly bits on it. It was covered in like cement powder, so it was kind of had that kind of powder slipperiness. It wasn't wet, but it was still slippery. There's no crash mats, no harness, and I had to basically lower myself into a hatch that was just a bit bigger than me with a backpack on that I couldn't feel to see if it was knocking. I had to open the hatch and then lower myself into it. And I had to do that so many times to get one where I wasn't bumping into things and it didn't look shit. And I mean, I managed to do it, but I was up there for a couple of days. And I mean, I look at it now and I was like my girlfriend now, if she saw what that was, she'd just stop me from doing it and keep reminding me I had a child. I didn't back then, but that was what it was. You know, it was one of those things where now I'd be like, nah, I'll really hurt myself if I fall off that. I mean, we did have an accident on set. There was a moment where Duncan fell and he had to get rushed off to hospital. That was bad. And I just ended up directing Moon for about a day and a half whilst he was in the hospital and he had a concussion and he was really bad. He fell off some scaffolding and hit his head on a bolt and he had a big gouge on his head. It was really bad. But yeah, again, it was that whole thing where it was really dramatic because he got knocked out when he fell and ambulance came and they put him in the ambulance on a stretcher. It was really dramatic because the producer Stuart was with him and him and Stuart were getting in the ambulance because Stuart's like, you know, I've got to make sure my director's alive because it was really scary when it happened. He fell about 15 feet. It was bad.
Wow.
And just as he was being put in the ambulance, he sort of started to stir. And the first AD, this Scouser guy called Mick Ward, he goes, what do you want us to do? Because nobody knew how long he was going to be gone for or anything. And he sort of put his hand up and pointed at me. So I stood right there. He goes, listen to Gav, and then passed out like
Oh my God.
He was like used all his energy. And so poor Duncan is off in the hospital getting stitches and, you know, checking to see if he's got concussion and stuff. So I just gave everyone 20 minutes to have a break, have a cigarette, and then we'll just get back together and keep going. We got our day on the wall, you know, we know what we're doing. So that was cool fun, but that was the kind of relationship that we had, you know, it was just us combining all of our brains to get this stuff done. But yeah, Moon was a wild ride.
Did that kind of, I don't know, set you onto a path of like wanting to direct yourself?
Yeah, not immediately. What happened after Moon was there was a quiet period because when you do your first film, it takes a year to finish it, right? You've got a lot of post to do. So technically you've made a film. No one's seen it. No one knows if it's any good. So it doesn't change your life in any way at all. Excuse me. But, you know, there's that weird holding period of about a year or 18 months before the film's released. So for us, that was like the last part of 2007 and all of 2008, pretty much, I think. Yeah, that was about us. So I was burnt out. I've been on that film for 22 months. I was knackered. I've been putting all my energy into it. Because the thing is, we'd finally got to make a film, and I didn't know if I was ever gonna get to do anything like that again. So I just everything I had into that film. Every little thing I could do to make it better or work hard, right? Anything I could do was going into it. And it affected my life. Like the girl I was seeing at the time, like that relationship fell apart. You know, I ended up living off credit cards because I wasn't getting paid. Like I neglected all my other work. You know, it's hard. I don't regret a moment of it, but it took a lot to do it. And at the end of it, Duncan ended up getting offered source code
Yeah, yeah.
And he asked me to go and go out to LA with him and production design it. And I just met a girl that I really liked, who is now the mother of my child.
Mm.
I was just burnt out.
Mm.
So I took a job in the advertising agency, working as a VFX director in a production company
Oh,
inside an advertising agency. I just spent 3 years getting my head together, getting my energy back. And
wow.
I mean, it's hard work in the advertising industry, but everything's easier than what I just done on Moon.
Wow.
So even though advertising's hard work, to me, that was easy. I was
Wow.
just able to get my energy back. And that led to me directing commercials whilst I was working there and doing all sorts of stuff. You're doing brand stuff for like, you
Mm.
know, it's all big brands. Um, and so then I was like, well, I had a weird period where after Moon, a lot of people got excited about making sci-fi films that cost a couple of million quid, and I had loads of directors getting in touch with me
Mm. Okay.
saying, "Will you do what you did for Moon on my?" And Moon was out of love. Like, Duncan was like my brother. This thing was our life mission to get it done. It's like it was like as far as my own artistic journey goes, it was the truest sense of what that is, like the love and the passion and the energy for the cause, that whole thing. That was what Moon was to me. To all of us when we were working on it. It wasn't a job. I got paid 15,000 quid for working on Moon for 22 months of work.
Wow.
That's why I was living off credit cards and stuff. It was so cliched. I had like a load of tins of soup in a cupboard, and I was just eating through those because I couldn't afford to pay off the interest on my 4 credit cards that I'd maxed out. It was financially, it was depressing times, but I managed to work myself out of it. But that was what it took. Like, it was a real labour of love doing that. But we got it made. So what happened around that period was I was getting all these scripts sent to me, and it was like I was getting like a couple of scripts a week. There's a lot of stuff over a course of about 18 months. I probably had like over 100 scripts sent.
Wow.
It's a lot. And honestly, no offense if you were listening to this and you're somebody who sent me one of those scripts, but they weren't lighting me up. And the thing is, I have this kind of deal with myself where I'll do something like Moon, but I'm not going to be doing that unless I'm so into it. Like, I have to love it. And I just wasn't reading anything I loved. But it was getting me into some conversations. Like, there was a production company out in New York they've like changed. I think the actual company itself's gone now. They were called Wayfair Entertainment, and they had a script for a film called Europa Report,
Oh,
and
yeah.
that's
Okay.
coming out. Excuse me. They approached me with that, and they asked me if I wanted to production design it, and I read it. And I read an early version of it, and I just didn't feel like it was in a good place. And I liked some of the ideas about it, but I didn't feel like it was finished. So I basically said, like, what I did was I wrote this big essay, and I was like, I appreciate you sending this over. I think I like the ideas in it, and there's definitely merit here, but I don't think this film's ready. I think it needs these things to be changed to it. And I wrote this big essay with photos and illustrations, all of this stuff, explaining why I thought things were wrong with it. And so that then got me into a conversation with them if I wanted to direct something. And at the time, Europa Report split on a different track and did its own thing. But they were saying, if there's anything you want to do yourself, if you've got any ideas for anything you want to direct, let's have a chat about that.
Wow.
So all of a sudden, talking to a production company in New York, asking me if I've got an idea I want to try and make into a film. So, you don't turn down those kind of opportunities, right? So I was thinking about things that might be good ideas. I had a couple of ideas for some stuff. And then I had a really weird weekend. And I lost both my computers in 2011. I've lost both my computers on a weekend. I had 2 PCs at home, got all my work on, everything backed up, everything's on there. And there was some weird power surge. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was in the middle of a spring clean. And I was, when you're doing a big house tidy, it wasn't a very big flat. But when you're doing a big house tidy, you have to kind of make everything messy so that you can tidy it up. I was in that horrible middle bit where I just made my whole house into a complete trash pile. And then there was some weird power thing happened. And when the power came back up, both my computers were dead. And this was on a Sunday, so I couldn't do anything to try and fix it. And I was in a real funk. And when I was never able to get either of these computers back up. I had to recover data from hard drives. It cost me a couple of thousand quid to do. Lost all my Moon data, had to get it recovered. whatever happened was really bad. Some kind of short or something. It was whatever it was bad. And I had to finish tidying up my flat, and I was so pissed off about what had happened. And excuse me, it felt like these computers had killed themselves on purpose to spite me. I was in a real funk, and there's something about that idea that caught my attention. Like I remembered it because I just like the idea of it. And there's a whole thing when you're trying to come up with a project that could eventually become a film, and you have this there's a series of steps you got to go through, and one of the most important ones I find happens early on, and it's the difference between having an idea and having a story. And those two things can be very different. You can have an idea for something that can be quite compelling, but it's not necessarily a story. And so what I was aware of the fact, what I'd got was an idea, but it wasn't a story. The idea of a computer, and when you turn it on, all it wants to do is die. So that then led to me quite quickly having the idea of what if somebody created a piece of software, like a program, which was an artificial intelligence that was supposed to be the equivalent to a human, and when they turn it on, it kills itself, which then could be a story as to like, why is it killing itself? Like, how can it stop it from killing itself? And that really lodged in my brain. I was like, there's something there, that's a hook, there's a thing going on here. And it had that kind of nice darkness to it that a lot of sci-fi kind of has, which is kind of appealing in a sci-fi genre, I find. And yeah, I think a nice kind of Philip K. Dick-esque kind of darkness to it, like a machine that wants to die. So I just kept thinking about that, and then within about 6 weeks, I've got the whole story worked out for Archive, basically.
Wow.
Nice. But that was back in 2011. That was like October.
Really? Wow.
It was a long time ago. Because what I do, if I became aware of the fact a long time ago, I sort of realised if I was ever going to get anywhere in life, it will be because I'd had an idea that then became developed. And so I started writing down notes in my phone. As soon as I got an iPhone, the Notes app was something I really took to. And I got like 18,000 notes in here now. And whenever I've got an idea that I think's got some value, whatever I'm doing, I'll stop and write it in my phone. So it's not unusual for me to just be walking down the street and I'll just stop dead and be like, don't forget that, don't forget it. And then when I get home, I'll pick it up on my computer and maybe it'll become a thing. So I've got all kinds of stuff, like just ideas that might become things. But Archive only exists because I had an idea and wrote it down and then started to build on it. It's the only reason that film got made. And now I'm working as a writer-director, all because of that, you know. So that's cool. It's worth doing.
Oh, yeah.
You got to keep your ideas because you never know when they might loop round again.
Right.
I mean, even now I'm writing things and I've got ideas from like 10 years ago that are relevant, you know, and I've got a whole resource of creative thinking that I can just dip into if I'm ever like sat on a train. I mean, it's quite a while since I was on a train, to be honest. I mean, you know, it's 2010 and none of us are really using trains that much anymore, but whenever you get some downtime, you know, I'll just flick through my notes and I'll be like, oh, I remember that idea I had for that thing. Just last night, I was doing a bunch of horrible maths. I'm not a mathematician by any means, but just going through my going through my notes on my phone, and I found an old note that I'd never followed up on, and it caught my imagination. I was like, it just lodged in my head for a couple of hours till I'd figured it out, and it was all to do with how a sci-fi story about a laboratory which is constructed with the sole experimental notion of breaking the speed of light to see what happens. And I'd got this note, and it was like how to create a laboratory that can move faster than light without needing an engine. So I'm reading it, and it was like this idea I had where you could just use, instead of using like linear velocity, linear speed, you could use angular speed. And you could basically create a lab in a space module, tether it to the Earth, and just keep winding it out. And because of rotational velocity, like on the Earth's surface, we're basically moving at 1,000 miles an hour. But because we're traveling around the circumference of the globe, if you can extend that and wind something out, it'll still keep spinning at the same rate. But the further you wind it, the circumference will increase and the speed will increase. So the further out you can wind it, the faster it's going to go. And I just had that idea, and I was like, that could be really cool as a conceit for something that might become, again, it's not a story, it's an idea, but it might be an idea that might become a story. But being a stickler for this stuff, it's like, I've got to figure out if that's in any way feasible in some distant future. So that then got me into maths and figuring it out. And it's like, how big is this circle going to have to be? How big is the tether going to have to be before it reaches that speed? So I worked it out and straight away talked myself out of it. And the tether would need to be over 2.5 billion miles long, which would be out almost out to Neptune and attached to the Earth, spinning around. But if you could do that, this pod on the end, if nothing got in the way and nothing went wrong, or there's nothing I'm not thinking about, if that simplistic version of it worked, you could have a room like a laboratory that would be traveling faster than the speed of light. And the thing that I liked about that I found interesting was the whole notion of an engine, building an engine that trying to accomplish the same goal and the engine never being able to achieve it because of the diminishing returns the closer you get. I don't quite understand it all, but I know that it's generally accepted by all the awesome physicists and engineers out there, so I've got to presume that's just the way it is. But I can't see how that same rule would apply to rotational velocity.
You
I don't know.
have some crazy ideas, I have to say.
Whole thing, but again, it's like, it just came from a note in my phone, but that's just
Yeah,
an
yeah.
example of how
And
I think
that's really, I think that's a really valuable lesson for everybody. I mean, we have so many ideas, right? But if it just stays that, or if it just stays in your head and you don't do anything with it, it doesn't have any value in the end. So I think that's something super valuable. I mean, so you have actually your path and your story is super interesting, and how when you look back, kind of everything fits together, but when you're in it, it's kind of it feels like a lot of craziness. I also know that you did like even while you were on a path of like working in the movie industry and trying to figure out what's next, and maybe already had some sort of like draft or something in progress that led you, I guess, like 8-9 years later to make Archive. I mean, you still kind of did your work on you did work on, like, for example, Star Citizen, which I know you work from. So how did you? I mean, you were not on a straight trajectory to get that movie made, or maybe you were, and then basically
not at all.
Star Citizen was kind of like, I mean, I don't know, paying the bills or something, so to speak, or
You could say that, but I mean, where this is something that we share a kinship, of course, because we're both alumni. Is that the right word?
all
Alumni?
three of us were alumni, yeah, from
Okay, right, here we
yeah.
are. Okay, Club Star Citizen. All right, this is awesome.
Yeah,
Um, I had no idea that we were all involved in it. Actually,
yeah,
I got
yeah.
to do research before these things. Sorry, I was writing all day. Actually, I still work for Star Citizen.
Interesting.
Yeah, right now. I mean, I'm sure we all know Paul Jones.
Yeah, of
We
course.
all know Paul Jones.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. The legend that is Paul Jones. We've got to shout him out after talking. Yeah, I mean, I get asked quite a lot about how you cross paths and become a film director, and the honest answer to it is to have two jobs. I mean, it means you'll be working two jobs, but I mean, my take on that is what I do. I work on Star Citizen during the day, and then I work on my film stuff during the evenings. So it just means I work a lot of nights. But I mean, anyone that has worked freelance for any stretch of their career in the games industry, I'm sure will be aware of how
Yep.
much work you can get done on a good evening.
Yeah, exactly. So I also saw that. I mean, for Archive specifically, talking about that project, I mean, I've just went through kind of like your IMDb and through the credits to see what was going on there. And I mean, you wore so many different hats on that one. You're credited as like the director, writer, producer, concept artist, production designer, and maybe even more. I don't know. How did you like? I mean, it must have been incredibly difficult to like switch all the time between these different positions. I mean, I assume that once principal photography started, you had to step in as a director and really focus on that. So was it like you had to do everything at the same time, or were you like, okay, in this period I'm this kind of position, okay, now we're shooting, I'm a director, now I don't know, maybe you did even the edit, I have no idea.
It's all one thing to me.
Okay.
The whole thing is my film. So I don't really delineate like that.
Okay.
And that's the cool thing about it when you're working as a director, if you have these other disciplines, because I'm thinking as a director when I'm doing concept art, I'm thinking about how these robots that I'm designing are going to move, and how that certain things I want to do with a set that will cause problems for those robot suits, and how to reconcile that, and all of that stuff. I've got all that stuff figured out, like way in advance. Um, no, it's all one thing. Honestly, I think it's easier the more stuff you do, and some of it's just really relaxing. Like doing the graphic design. You
Mm.
know, I can unwind a little bit and do some graphic design work in an evening when we're in
Mm.
pre-production.
Mm,
It's,
mm, mm.
I'll put some nice music on and make myself a nice hot drink and just spend an evening doing graphic design and feel really good about the world. It's
Mm, mm,
awesome.
mm, mm. Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, was there any sort of pressure though from the production company to say like, "Hey, can you please focus on getting this done and stop
Oh
doing
no,
like the 50 other things?" No.
no. No. I mean, it's funny you say that. I guess that's would probably be the kind of default way to approach something like this. But the producer, Philip Hurd, and myself, we've known each other for years.
Ah, okay.
When I left the advertising company, the reason why I left, well, so much the reason, the first thing that happened was we fell into each other's orbits. So we've known each other for a long time, and we've made my short film, The Last Man, we've made that together
Okay.
to kind of sort of shake out working together a little bit. So we've known each other for a long time, and we have each other's trust. The reason why I'm doing this, look, what the whole thing is, right? I'm happy to work with other people. I would love to work with other people when I can afford it and when I can find someone that's better than me at what I'm doing. So if I can make those two things happen, that would be great. We had no money on Archive, so I had
Okay.
no choice.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was doing the same stuff I was doing on Moon. We have no budget to cover this stuff, so I'm just getting it done. And from my perspective, what that does is adds value to the project. And I'm one of those directors that can bring a lot of extra value to a project because I can do all these other things. Now, if I am fortunate enough to one day make a $150 million sci-fi epic, I'm sure I'll probably still be doing the graphic design, but it won't be quite the same thing. Do you know what I mean? I'm happy to delegate. I just got to be able to get good people and pay them properly.
Right,
If I
right,
can't do
right.
that, I'm doing it myself.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it makes total sense. It makes total sense. And if you want to get it done the way you want it to, right, then for all intents and purposes, you have to do it yourself. Iman,
Yeah.
did you have any question?
No, I'm just fascinating by, by this whole
No,
process.
it's a super
It just,
interesting.
I'm tired listening to it.
There's an interesting thing I wanted to ask is so you've been the artist working with an art director, production designer, with a director, taking direction from them, and now you've actually been the director yourself. And I saw some people posting on Instagram, for example. I think Nick Levy, who did some of the hard surface
Yeah,
design, which
what a
looks
dude.
crazy awesome. So I was wondering, has your attitude towards artists or your relationship with artists, now that you have hired them, and you direct them, has it somewhat changed your I don't
Well,
know, your relationship with them?
I've been running teams since
Oh, right,
you know,
right.
2000, 99,
Mm-mm.
2000. So, I mean, it has a somewhat in that I'm definitely more protective over artists when I'm working with them. I don't know whether they're going to notice this or not, but I
Mm.
definitely, I understand what they got going on. Everyone's got to get paid on time. I'd like to
Mm-mm.
pay people more sometimes than I'm able to,
Mm.
but I feel there's a little bit of a disparity sometimes between what I'm able to pay somebody and what I actually would think their work is actually worth.
Mm.
But again, that's all a conversation. But I always have this little thing in my head where I'll make it up to them later if I'm able to do that.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, yes, but from my side, as much as how I like to consider other people. I mean, I'm fortunate enough now to be at a point in my career where, I mean, look at us now talking. I mean, yeah, I'm a fan of what you do. Your work's very, very high level,
Mm.
and it means a lot to me to be considered a peer. It means a lot. I mean, it's like Twitter, right? A lot of people have left Twitter in the last few years.
Mm.
I will never leave Twitter whilst there's like a little art community that I'm in with people like, Ian Mackay and Pascal Blanche and these kind of people.
Mm.
And, like people like Fred Gambino and stuff, like we chat on Twitter, and they for some reason, regard me as an equal and a peer.
For
That
some
means
reason.
everything to me,
Come
because
on.
I know these guys are all miles better than me. And so to be able to talk with these really great artists on a kind of equitable level means everything to me. It really does. Like, I never had like an art group like this when I was at uni and stuff. And I don't know, just when you work in freelance, like you spend a lot of time trying to make your art better, and to get it, so it feels like a success to me, like to be able to be considered a peer of artists whose work I think is awesome. That means a lot to me. And so, where am I going with this? I had something with this, and I forgot what my original point was. To be able to hire people, like people like Callum Alexander Watt. You know, he was the other artist. There's only three of us on Archive. There was Nick Levy, Callum Alexander Watt, and
Oh
myself.
yeah,
I've
fantastic.
got to get these guys work out their own sorts of production and make sure it's not embargoed anymore. Because the character work that Callum did, I mean, I only got to work with him for a few weeks, but the work they did was just invaluable to the project. And the
Oh
three
yeah,
of
he's
us,
amazing. Yeah.
I felt we were really powerful as a team, like the three of us. Like we were punching way above our weight. And for me to be able to pull people like that together, like I've got on my list of artists that I hope to work with in the future, you know, and it's just so exciting. I mean, one of the things about working as a film director that I find really exciting is you get to pull all these hopefully great people together in service of like your thing that you're trying to do, and hopefully make it everybody's thing. And it's like with Archive, I got to work with Laurie Rose, cinematographer, Stephen Price, composer. You know, Stephen won an Academy Award for the music for Gravity in 2014.
Oh wow.
You know, so I've got like an Academy, and that guy he's a legit genius. You know, and he's making the music for my film. I mean, one of the things about that I was reflecting on this morning actually. It's just a thought that keeps popping into my head. Of all the different types of disciplines of creative stuff that I get involved with, music is the one that I don't play any instruments. I don't, you know, there's nothing, I don't have any kind of musical thing about me other than I really love music and I know when I like it. That's my whole music thing. So to have someone like Stephen, like on the team, I mean, you know, what am I gonna say to Stephen? Like, how am I gonna brief him? You know, what can I say to him? Can I what like? Am I gonna go around to his studio and like sort of hover over him whilst he's showing me a piece of music and go, no, not that key, Stephen, this piano key. Like, what am I? You know what I mean? Like, what am I gonna do with?
Exactly.
And so with someone, you need someone like Stephen, so you can just let him do what he thinks it needs to be, and you know you're going to get some genius back, genius work back. And that's what we did. It's like we went and talked about the film quite a bit, and you know went out for drinks a few times and talked about things a lot. I have this whole thing whenever I'm working with somebody, if at all possible, I like to make sure I meet up with them a few times and hang out in the bar a few times and have drinks, so that later on down the road we actually have a proper rapport with each other, so we don't need to dance around each other too much if we need to have any hard chats about anything. But so when you're working with someone like Stephen Price and like Laurie Rose, for me, that then means you get to go to the pub and hang out and have a nice social side to things. And then when you do the work, everything's completely fine and they just kind of deliver it. And it's all fantastic. And it's just such a great experience. But yeah, being able to work with like supremely talented people in service of a thing that was originally my idea just makes me feel super spoiled.
Yeah, I was wondering, right? I mean, so you have like a professional crew around you, and you're like, well, it's your first feature film, right? I assume that a lot of people will like look towards you for direction, for your vision, right? I mean, was there? I mean, except for like the music part now, was there any time you felt particularly like out of your depth that you like,
No.
why am I here?
I mean,
why am I like, I have no idea
no.
what I'm doing, kind of thing? No.
Not for 1 second. The thing about the music too, it's not like I felt out of my depth with it. It's just that I didn't need to think about it because I had Stephen on board. So I didn't need to worry about it. It's like Stephen could do his thing, and if for some reason he turns up something that is like needs to be talked about, we'll talk about it. But until that happens, Stephen can do Stephen, and that's all I ever needed.
Interesting.
But no, the rest of it. I mean, the film production, it's not magic. You know, I mean, I guess the thing about film production that makes a lot of people makes it maybe feel more mysterious than maybe it is or should be, is that there is no definitive way to do it. Like you have your own, you know, you figure out your own way of approaching it. So maybe that's why it seems a little bit more mysterious than really it is. But I'm from Yorkshire in North England. I'm quite a practical person, and so when it comes to this stuff, it's quite straightforward to me. And I mean, the main reason why I felt confident doing archive was because all I was doing was the same stuff I did on Moon.
Right.
A bit extra, a bit more, but
Yeah.
I was in the same meetings, having the same conversations, hearing the same things, understanding where the problems were going to be. You know, it was completely demystified. And I mean, each film will come with its own challenges, of course. It's not like I've completely nailed everything, but you know, you've got a team around you who you can trust. You better have a team around you can trust, and at any point, the whole thing is conversational. It's all a conversation. And so if you've got people you trust, and ideally people you like and respect, that are on your side, and it's all conversational, I don't think it needs to. I mean, you're going to have stressful conversations, and you know you're going to be at a crunch. You're always going to be trying to, especially when you're doing smaller things. Like, you know, we had a tiny budget for Moon, we had a tiny budget for Archive. You're always trying to make it look like more than it is, and you know, create the illusion of you know the world continuing around the corner. Make it look bigger and more expensive than it really is. But I mean, you plan a lot as well with things like this. There's always a plan. So you really shouldn't be feeling out of your depth because you should have planned it. And it doesn't have to be a 100% super tight plan, but I like a kind of a 3/4 plan where there's a quarter wiggle room to see what's going on when you're actually there and feel the energy in the moment. But, you know, you shouldn't. I mean, I have a good example of this actually. Every now and again, a while back, before I shot Archive, I woke up and I had a dream I was shooting the film. And I was talking to my girlfriend. I was like, woke up and I was like, oh, and you know, when you're in bed and you're just talking about, you know, you're still in bed, like you've not even got out of bed. And I was, I just had a really, really awful dream. I dreamt I was shooting Archive. And she said, like, isn't that an awesome dream? Like, this is the thing you want to do. Surely that should be like the best dream ever. And I said to her, but it's not at all, because in my dream, everything's weird and I don't know what's going on and it's all confusing and wrong. And there's all this weird stuff. And I'm looking around and I don't understand any of it. And it's a nightmare because you can't have that when you're shooting a film. Like, you have to know what's going on. You have to have your plan. You have to have your troops. You have to be all set, you know. And, you know, the whole thing, the shooting days are scheduled, like, you know, weeks in advance. So you shouldn't be out of your depth, really. I mean, I'm sure there are situations where people can get out of the depth. But, I mean, that's my biggest fear, is feeling out of my depth.
Interesting. Yeah, makes total sense. I mean, it makes total sense.
Actually, I have a
go
question. I was wondering. So now that you know Archive's out, what's next for you? I mean, or do you want to move into like a just full-time?
Archive 2, Electric Boogaloo.
Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
No, there's a whole bunch of stuff I'm working on. I'm unfortunately I can't talk about them because everything's going really well at the moment. Touch some wood things. I got signed by CAA out in LA, like the biggest agency out there, signed me up, which was awesome. I've got a couple of fantastic agents out there, and they've been plugging me in. So traditionally, what would happen is you'd go out to LA, you'd spend a couple of weeks out there, you'd travel around, you'd meet everybody, you'd go and have some really nice lunches, have a few drinks, and have all these conversations. But because of where we are right now in this fun party pandemic, everything's been done over Zoom. So I'm just having lots of Zoom calls with people in LA and meeting all these people. I met some fantastic people at all these big production companies and studios and stuff, and getting on people's radar, and people asking me what I want to do next. Have I got anything? Have I got any ideas? Do you want to talk? Send over things. Let's have a chat. So I've got these conversations going. I can't say who they're with and I can't say what they're for, but I currently have... I've got 2 really good developed chats, one of which is actually a second draft, one of which is still a treatment, but both really promising conversations with big companies. I've got a third one, which is working on securing an IP for something which will be brilliant. I've got 2 smaller projects which I'm doing as they're not sidelines, but they're smaller projects which are cooking a little bit slower. So yeah, I've got like 5 film projects on at the moment. But again, I'm working full time. Like I have a full-time job working on Star Citizen.
Oh, wow.
So this is all me working in evenings. But
Wow.
What are you doing on Star Citizen at the moment?
I'm designing ships. Again, I can't tell you which one, but it's yeah, I'm designing a ship. That's kind of my answer at any point in the calendar if you ask me what I was doing.
Oh, that's great. No, your ships are legendary. I mean, and I think this is such a inspiring thing. I mean, it sounds inspiring. It's like, oh my gosh, look at this guy working so hard. I'm sure that it's on your end. You would love to focus on getting your movies done. I assume.
Well,
you don't have to worry about the rest, but
I don't know. It's tricky because I mean, Star Citizen is the most fun and most engaging freelance work I've ever had. They're the best clients I've ever had. I love the community. I love the reaction to the work. I love the open source nature of the development of Star Citizen. I mean, it's taking a long time, but I mean, you know, the tastiest cooking takes the longest, right? It's one of those things where it's really starting to manifest into a thing now, and the people that stuck with it are really starting to, you know, they're really starting to feel it too. It's such a great fan community. I mean, going to the CitizenCon, I went to CitizenCon in Manchester 2 years ago, and just getting to meet all these people that are backing, like all the backers that are playing the game. I mean, they're just it's such a cool community, and I love that my work can have a home in such an energized fan community that are so into it. It's great.
No, that's great that you enjoy. I didn't want to downplay Star Citizen by any means. No, but I'm just thinking like in terms of, I think there's a natural tendency to say like, oh, so you kind of moved up to director, you're doing something better now, right? So why would you still do like the work of a lowly artist kind of thing, right? But I mean, it's great that you actually don't see it like that at all, right? That you're enjoying the different challenges for now. And I mean, once you get signed on that $150 million epic, I'm not sure they're gonna let you continue on Star Citizen. We'll have another chat.
I have a dream where I get to do a $150 million film, and then when we wrap on that, I have a little break and design another ship for Star Citizen and a little break for fun. I would love it if I could keep working like that.
I mean, Star Citizen is gonna sell a hell lot of ships if they have 2-time Academy Award nominee or winner Gavin Rothery design one of their ships. That's gonna be one hell of a marketing slogan, right? Cool. Iman, do you have any last question before we wrap this up?
No, I'm good.
Is there anything else you want to maybe promote, Gavin? I mean, you could your movie just came out in the UK, I guess, like on the streaming platforms or in a theatrical.
That's right.
I mean, in the theater. I don't know.
Everywhere except Netflix, pretty much. Yeah, I mean, I can't remember the list. We're on about a dozen streaming services. Amazon Prime seems to be the main one people focus on, and iTunes.
Right,
yeah. We've still got some territories to release in. The film was released globally, so wherever you live in the world, you will be getting it. It was supposed to be a theatrical release, but the coronavirus closed down the theaters. But it's still going to be coming to you on your streaming service. So we were out in the US last July, so we've been out in America for 6 months now. So wherever you live in the world, it will be coming to you. I think we're nearly out. There's still some territories left to come. So if you want to follow me on Twitter at Gavrov, at GAVROV, I'll be sure to keep everybody posted on there, and I'll have all kinds of cool pictures of robots and vintage sports cars.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll put the link in there below. We're also going to put a link to your ArtStation account. I mean, people already saw it in the background who were watching the YouTube video. There were there was so much of like behind the scenes stuff from Moon, which is really awesome to see. It must have been a lot of funny times with Duncan Jones and the crew that we can see on those pictures.
Oh, we had some right old adventures. It was awesome.
Yeah,
We were like a bunch of kids, and nobody was telling us not to do anything.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
It was great.
So yeah, I mean, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
we hopefully all
you.
remember this when Gavin just came off archive and he was on to his crazy next project. Thank you again for taking the time, and thanks for everybody listening to this. We'll put the links for Gavin's accounts in the comments as usual. And if you like this episode, please like, comment, and subscribe. And please check out Archive. It's on all the streaming services, and unfortunately not Netflix, but there's a way to see it out there in most parts of the world. So please do that. And thank you so much, guys, and see you in the next episode. Bye.